Since there are so few of us, I'm going to introduce myself, tell you who I am and what I do, and then let's go around the room and talk a little bit about you guys, because I don't want to be up here talking for however long, giving you information you don't need, don't want, not interested in. So I have a talk prepared, but I don't know how firmly I'm going to stick to it, depending on what you guys want to know about. So why don't we start with you?
Hi everybody, my name is Robyn Underwood. I'm Ukrainian American. My parents came from Ukraine after World War II. I graduated chemical engineering, worked as a pharmaceutical engineer for 38 years, found a Ukrainian girl whose grandma came over from Ukraine much earlier, had a farm. So after we got married, we built our house on the farm to keep the farm going another generation or two. Having all this land, 150 acres, like a normal Ukrainian, I started running organic gardens as well as orchards. Didn't have any fruit. So that's when I learned the bees, the natural bees that all died off from the varroa mites. So talking with a Polish engineer one day, he said, you got to have your own bees for pollination. You're in luck. I'm a master beekeeper. It's June. Come to my house this Saturday and we'll go in, look for queen cells, and you'll go home with a box and start becoming a beekeeper. So that's what I did, and over the last 34 years or something like that, I quickly grew to where I've been running 40 to 60 beehives. And I've done I've done pretty much Langstroths. About 10 years ago I got into top bars but gave up on them. I also run some Ukrainian style hives that are double wood, running 12 Langstroth frames in every direction. And I do Apivar in early spring, but the rest of summer, for about the last 10 years, I've been doing formic acid pads that I make up myself, getting these pads from up in Canada, up in Vancouver from one guy. And then last year I got into oxalic acid fogging. And I finally retired about 10 years ago from being pharmaceutical engineer, so that gives me more time around the house. So not that I don't have a lot of time, because I also grow about 10,000 pounds of garlic, but I have about 10 apprentices that I help every year to get them going in the right direction. 10,000
pounds of garlic, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, so
what are you here for? What do you want to hear about?
Oh, this is the most exciting subject in the world, and I'm hoping to learn more.
Great.
And I'm also here to support the Ukrainian American Beekeeping Society.
Great, outstanding. How about you? I know we've already talked, but for the benefit of everyone else.
Well, just in a nutshell, my ancestors or my uncle brought beehives to upstate New York, so Narrowsburg, New York. So growing up, I watched him taking care of bees, and then all of a sudden I moved to a property where I could keep bees myself. It's 10-acre property in New Jersey, and it's mostly pasture and diverse plants. And so, and then when I visited Ukraine, I found that there are so many different methods of beekeeping in Ukraine. So I found it intriguing, and I started to study the old archaic methods of tree or wild beekeeping. And so that this all evolved into what style of beekeeping. I don't treat, so I guess I'm curious as to what all these other alternatives are. So I guess this, like I said in the beginning, it's a dream come true to have all you here to help teach all of us what's going on.
Next.
Hello, my name is Devin Paderewski. I am here because I came with Robyn, and I got into beekeeping and fell in love with bees working for commercial beekeepers, and I really just like the genetic breeding side of it, and I like natural beekeeping, so that's kind of where I gathered myself, like learning about the successful people that were doing chemical-free beekeeping, like Gillespie and Kirk Webster and such. And Solomon, your work was really helpful to me, like in finding a lot of those people. When I first started realizing that that's what I was specifically interested in. So I provided the genetics for Robyn's experiment last year, and now I'm working for her part-time, and I'm just really happy to be here and meeting everybody.
Bridget, I'm sure we'll hear more about you in your talk.
Yeah, I think we can
So
talk about
save that
personal,
for
not
later.
your formal side.
Yeah, well, I worked with and for a lot of different kinds of beekeepers in my life, from biodynamic to conventional. And for the past 5 years, I've been at the University of Minnesota, working for the bee lab there, doing education for a lot of beekeepers, new beekeepers, experienced beekeepers, and then also for the public, and working with different groups like organic city farmers, conventional farmers, all different kinds of groups out there to try to help all pollinators, not just honeybees. So that's something I'm interested in pushing a little bit here. Mostly here because my family also comes from Ukraine, and I want to find out what my family name means, which is Daniluk. I don't know how to say it in Ukrainian, Danyluk. So I need to find that out before I leave.
Oh my God, awesome.
I'll figure it out.
A couple days.
Okay, you?
My name's Battles Silianis. I live in Gardner, New York, or on the other side of the ridge. Started beekeeping on and off in 2004. Was home for high school. My dad threw Beekeeping for Dummies at me. Told me stop being a bum. I read it and I got into it. On and off then, so grew up in New York, Connecticut, and then past 8 years so I've been in Oakland, California. Was volunteer with Beekeepers there. I worked for Greenpeace for 12 years, so I was traveling. Moved back here and bought some land with my partner. We're on 50 acres. It's in the woods though, so I'm fascinated by forest beekeeping. Started 6 hives this year, 3 anarchy apiary packages, and then I pretty much don't use anything. It kind of always was like that. Even when I started with my dad, it'd be our arguments. I've been more radical anti-everything. I'm still doing that. I'm a bit more trying to experiment stuff here. I'm running lanes, hives, and lane shops right now. It's just been a battle with the bears and figuring out these wet East Coast winters and how to do it out here. So it's so good to be here with the methods and learn about this.
Right on. You?
I'm Linda Davis, and I'm from Central Massachusetts. And I'm just a backyard beekeeper, and I've been keeping bees, I think, like a dozen years or more. I got into it because I was into making mead, and the price of honey just kept, good honey kept getting higher and higher. And a friend of mine had some hives, and he went on sabbatical to Australia for a year. So I took his hive, the one that he had left, to take care of it, and he lived. So I was hooked at that point. And I never went to the beekeeping class, but you know, there were people that I got information from, and they just told you have to put this in now, this chemical in this time, this one, and then you'd ask somebody else, and they'd have a whole different, oh no, you shouldn't use that, you should use this. And the last, I think as the last 5 years, it's been harder and harder for these bees to survive. I've had more and more trouble with the bees, and started learning more about, I don't do pharmaceuticals myself. I try to eat organic, and even feeding sugar to my bees bothers me. I only do it if it's like they're going to starve. Other than that, I kind of feel like they should be able to get what they need. And I don't have a lot of land. I live on 1.7 acres, but I have been gardening for the entire time I've lived there. So I have a pretty extensive herb garden, and I have fruit trees, and I have a lot of different varieties of plants available for the bees, which I think is important for them to have a variety of sources, not just one thing. But so I'm interested in learning more about what other people are doing in the treatment-free and am getting some scientific backing because a lot of the stuff that I do here seems to not have a lot of data behind it. And I feel like even with beekeeping conventional, you ask 5 different people, you get 5 different answers. And so there is no one way. I think that's been the way proven to be best for the bees. So keeping an open mind is good. Here to learn.
I'm Sam Comfort. I run Anarchy Apiaries. I'm a recovering commercial beekeeper. I started in 2003. The last 14 years I've been treatment-free, and also in those 14 years I've been raising my own queens, and in 14 years of queen raising I've never done it the same way twice. And I brought some of my bees, some mating nymphs here that we're going to play with maybe later today or tomorrow, and you'll get a whole earful of what I have to say. So
Yeah,
glad to be here.
Hi, my name's Steve Stafford. I live in New York City, and last year I got into bees. And how I got into bees is I run a small store there, a little hardware store, and a friend of mine came in and he's telling me he's getting bees. And so you're getting bees? What are you? So he told me he's going to get a couple hives, and like whatever. That interests me like crazy. I'm getting online ordering bees before I even read the dummy, the Beekeeping for Dummies book. Shit, I think I had everything. I had the hives and a lot of through my hardware store I could order. So I even got an oxalic acid, that single one you put in there. And before I learned anything, so that's still sitting wherever. And so then the next thing I do, and kind of while I'm here, these two guys are, these are rock stars between. If you learned how to keep bees on YouTube. And so I got 2 hives out of, I think it was not Georgia, but Kentucky, Kelly's bees maybe last year. And hell, I knew they were all going to die by this last winter, but one made it through. And so anyhow, this year I started, and I got 4 hives going now. And I ain't got no idea what I'm doing. I'm trying these guys' method. I don't want to use any chemicals no matter what, but it's kind of unique. My bees are like about 14 feet below the street level, so they don't get sun. They get a couple hours of sun, maybe each of them during the day. But then I'm on a concrete slab. That might be a good thing, but it stays damp kind of down there. And while I'm here, just listen to these guys, but if you're learning to keep bees on YouTube, there's a lot of educated, interesting people representing, that you have to use chemicals in there. And then you hear these guys, so I got to keep up, I got to stay on top of these guys so they can throw that magic at me to keep me away from that stuff. But I'm not, I'm not putting my kids through college, raising bees. So I can see why some of them people, you got to use it if you're, well, maybe you don't have to, but I might if I was, if that was my only income or something. But I sure do love it. And thank y'all. Yeah.
And we still have Mark up here.
Yeah.
Just arrived. Just tell us a little bit about your experience.
I'm a backyard beekeeper as well. On my 4th year, was going to give it up after my 1st, 2nd, and 3rd year because I lost the bees due to various reasons. I live in an area, it's near I'm in New Jersey, so I live near an area that has a lot of land and parkland, and I thought this would be an ideal situation. Patricia and Roman have helped me kind of get set up. But it's interesting where I am, even though there's a lot of land, a lot of people use chemicals, pesticides, so I think one year I had 50,000 bees just in front of the hive, all like dead from toxins. A bear got them another year, so now we have an electric fence. But we've been kind of going back and forth with various things. I think it's been very interesting because I'm in the medical world, so I'm very scientific. But on the other hand, I also feel like the body and in nature, a lot of things are designed to kind of take care of themselves. And so it's been a humbling experience working with bees and trying to figure out kind of a balance and trying to do something good. Anyway, in my area, there's a lot of greenery, but there aren't a lot of things for the bees to really forage, which is very interesting. You wouldn't think that in the area where we are. And then some of the bees that we've received from Georgia have not really done well in our area, and you know, trying to work with more local sources now. Roman has helped me get some nukes going, and even I was able to spot the queens like that when we went to inspect them last week. So I'm very excited to hear, you know, various people's ways of being successful and trying to do the right things.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to call an audible and not do this talk. If you want to see this talk, it's called The Case for Doing It the Hard Way. You can find that on my YouTube channel. It's at youtube.com/treatmentfree-beekeeping. So I've got about 120 videos there. I usually record all these talks and post them there so that people who were there and would like to go back and check what they've been... Oh yeah, if you want the address, I can just put that up here really quick. These are the things I do as a public-facing beekeeper. I'm not really interested in being famous, so you don't need to remember my name.
He already is.
Yeah, so like she said, she Googled and found me. I'm like, I hope I wasn't first.
I think you were.
Oh, man.
Well, because I used the word organic, so probably Michael Bush was first.
Probably Michael Bush, yeah. So, just a little bit about myself before I think my talk called How to Start Beekeeping Treatment Free would be a better fit for what we're going to talk about here today. So I think first I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about my way that I do things, a little bit about how I talk to people and communicate to people, because as a number of you mentioned, there's a big... Whenever the subject comes up, there's always arguments and there's acrimony and fighting and stuff, and I don't think that's very useful or helpful from either side. It's you could say it's kind of part of our culture today, how things have become divided politically, but it really, humans have been arguing for a long time. It's part of our nature as social creatures. Politics, of which beekeeping is a part, in a sense, is the way that we as a group of people do things together without being able to talk and adjust, modify, change our minds. We'd have basically person-on-person civil war going on all the time, and that's not very helpful. That's not what we're made for. So about myself, I was born and raised in Southern Oregon. I was born in Grants Pass, raised in Ruche. Ruche is French for beehive, for any of you. So those of you that like robin, bird, etc., we all have connections to the things that we end up doing. It's like Sam talks about how bees are always very similar to their keeper a lot of times. You know, pets often look like their owners. And, you know, it's all connected. So I was graduating high school in 2002, and I didn't really have any prospects in life. Didn't know what I was going to do. I was working at a steel yard, which is a real drag. Working outdoor, it's dirty, loud. So I thought, what am I going to do with my life? Am I going to work at a steel yard my whole life? And there was a commercial beekeeper who lived down the street. And he had one of his holding yards a couple miles down the road, and we'd drive by that every day. And so I thought, well, maybe I could be a commercial beekeeper. And so my sort of family motto is, if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. And so unlike your average new beekeeper who buys 1, 2, maybe 3 packages to start beekeeping, I bought 20. Totally overspent, overreached, overdid everything, and started out like totally into it. Next few years, realizing that I had overstepped, didn't have enough equipment to cover everything, I kind of let the bees die off a little bit, because the person that I found to sort of follow my chosen path, because when I started beekeeping, I didn't, how would I characterize my attitude toward the whole thing? I thought that treatments shouldn't be required. So my basic attitude was animals should be able to do their own thing. Like, I know everybody says bees need treatment. Treatment-free beekeeping wasn't really a thing back then. It certainly wasn't called that. But I don't feel like they should need to be treated. I feel like they should be able to do this on their own. And so pretty rapidly I found people like D. Lusby, who had never treated from all the way back in the 80s. Michael Bush, who had just finished his first successful winter, treatment-free at that time. And a couple other people who are still around, but not nearly as public. So yeah, so I excuse me a second. Sorry, like I said, I'm just getting over a cold. I got the kind of final cough thing going on. It's kind of annoying. So eventually I moved to Arkansas and went to school, became a civil engineer. So my letters after my name are MSCE, so I have that. Moved the bees to Arkansas with me. At that point I had about 6 hives that were, you know, I like to keep my hives nice and tall year round. That's one of my practices that's not common. I might talk about that a little later. So in Arkansas is really where I came into my own as a beekeeper. Expanded up from, my lowest point was 2 hives, expanded up to where I would have generally around 24 full-size hives year-round, and then I would make nukes and stuff, get up to 40, 45, 50, sell nukes, sell queens. Just, for me, hive numbers are not that important. It's like in nature. There's kind of a zone. Things happen, hives die, new hives are created, and I like to say that I become interactive with the natural population. The natural population ebbs and flows. I think your kept population ebbs and flows. I think the idea that you should have a certain number of hives and you take care of them really well so that you don't lose any, I don't think that's very helpful or useful or natural, or I think it introduces a lot of unnecessary stress. So if you kind of live in an ethos of the way that nature works, you're going to realize that there's going to be an ebb and a flow. There's going to be some years you're going to lose more than others. Some years you're going to have great years and you get to have bragging rights. Other years you're going to lose 90% and you're going to learn how to come back from that. And that's all part of the process. I don't keep bees to have bees. I keep bees to keep bees. That's, by its very nature, it's an action. It's a continual learning process. It's a continual, you think of it in terms of natural selection, it's a continual battle between predator and prey. We live in a state of change at all times. Dadgummit. I cannot figure out why my computer, whenever I plug an extra monitor into it, decides it needs to shut off after 5 minutes. Can't figure it out. If somebody has any ideas, I'm open. So as far as what I do, let me just pull up Robyn's diagram, and I'll just tell you where I fall on these things, and then I'll explain where a lot of other treatment-free beekeepers fall. Because, like Robyn said, there's not a specific, like you don't have to draw straight lines here. I personally, my theory of the case as far as treatment-free beekeeping is that's a choice that I've made. It's a lifestyle that I live. If other people want to do that and learn how to do that, come talk to me. I'm not interested in debating. I'm not interested in convincing you to do anything a certain way. If you want to do it, I'm totally fine with that. At the end of the day, at the end of the century, at the end of the millennium, we will evolve into a new species or go extinct. Bees will evolve into a new species or go extinct. This tiny frame of time is not that important. That being said, there are reasons why I do certain things, and I'll talk about that as we go along. So my main focus on treatment-free beekeeping is just that. That's the one descriptor that I have of what I do. It's the one descriptor that we have in the treatment-free beekeeping group and the YouTube page. It's all, you can have whatever style hive you want. You can do whatever type of management you want. You want to pollinate, you want to make honey, you want to make wax. Have fun, enjoy yourself. The focus we have is not treating, so that we can be part of the natural selective process to allow the bees to do their own thing, to deal with pests on their own. So obviously no varroa mite treatment, no small cell hive bee, anyway, none of this. So I'm straight line right here. I've never treated since I started in 2003 when I got my first bees. I did initially try out screen bottom boards, which were a thing for crying out loud. It's worse today than normal. But again, I kind of ran back into that idea of screen bottom boards aren't a thing that happens in nature, really. I don't see why bees should need them to survive. If they do help, then I don't need them. I don't want to have them because I want the bees to be able to do it themselves. Even if they do work, which, looking at the information from the Bee Informed surveys, I'm not convinced that they work. And that's another thing with what the surveys show. In nature in general, there's very little binary difference, right? If you look at the numbers between treating beekeepers and non-treating beekeepers, it's not 100% and 0%. It's like 35% and 45%. There's not a huge difference at the end of the day between the two. So the idea that if you don't treat, all your bees are going to die is not supported by the evidence, not supported by the data. The idea also that if you do treat your bees that they're all going to survive is likewise not supported by the data. Right? So we're in the middle somewhere. We're always in the middle somewhere. The one main point that I have disagreement with Robyn on is the small cell comb. And once again, Robyn and I are friends. We get along fairly well, even though we disagree. This is okay. This is what makes part of beekeeping fun, is getting together and things like this and talking to each other and disagreeing. And we don't have to call each other names. We don't have to insinuate the other one is stupid. You can just be wrong. You don't have to be an idiot. So the reason why I'm not saying necessarily that this is wrong. I think there's another dimension. There's further complexity that we need to go into, because I would say there needs to be another line here, which is foundation or not foundation. And the purpose of foundation, ultimately at the end of the day, is to keep your comb straight in the frames, or whatever system you're using. And so the idea that I'm trying to change the size of the bees to control mites, I don't think that's really supported by the data either. What I'm doing with small cell comb is trying to keep my hive straight. And the reason I use small cell is it seems to be a more natural size than the conventional size, which might be 5.2 to 5.4 millimeters. Either way, if you're using foundation, you're controlling or attempting to control or affecting the size of the bee. Either way. So my question with small cell is, if small cell works to control varroa, why would you use a foundation that doesn't? Why would you use a foundation that does the opposite? That's a question that I have. Anyway, as far as queen replacement, pretty much only to correct. That's how the hive works in nature, right? If a queen gets old, her pheromones start to diminish. She runs out of eggs. She doesn't run out of eggs. She runs out of sperm. The bees are going to replace her. They're going to deal with it, right? I add the additional factor that if I have a really mean hive, I do this to have fun. This is my hobby. It's not my job. It's kind of my job, but very small side job. I don't want to have a bad time out there working with the bees. I like to work with the bees without gloves because I feel it's better for feeling. You don't smash bees as much, they don't get as mad. Oh, jeez. I either need to talk faster or go through more slides.
Hand me that mouse and I'll just keep wiggling
Okay.
it.
Well, if I can remember, I have the mouse on here. Anyway. Also, equipment. There's some people sort of erroneously believe that natural beekeeping, you wouldn't use a hive because it's not natural. I actually don't use the word natural because keeping bees all together is not natural. It's not natural for the bees, right? Bees have existed a lot longer than humans have. It's natural for humans. Humans have kept bees since they figured out how, thousands of years. I would say that's natural. It's natural for humans to keep bees. It's not natural for bees to be kept by humans. So I don't use the word natural because everything that we do is in some way unnatural, other than, you know, cutting down a tree and robbing honey like a bear or something. So as far as equipment goes, I tend to use traditional Langstroth equipment. Right? I want to try other things, but I just have so much Langstroth equipment at this point. It doesn't make sense to make up a bunch of new stuff, spend money and time to build new stuff. I want to try other things. Especially Sam's super cheap Warray style hives. I want to try those. Comb treatment, I don't really do anything. That again speaks to, I do rotate comb. I take out old funky looking comb when I harvest honey. So cycle new, either empty foundationless frames or foundation frames in. So the bees build new wax. Wax absorbs toxins and pollutants in the hive. And in a natural situation, as a colony will eventually die out, and that wax is going to be eaten by wax moths. A new colony is going to move in, and they're going to build new comb. I have also heard reports of colonies kind of moving in a cavity and allowing a certain section of comb to be eaten by wax moths and then reoccupying that section. So I think that's a natural process, which I sort of simulate by adding new frames every year and cycling out the old ones. Feeding, I generally don't want to feed. I don't do stimulative feeding. I want the bees to be well adapted so that they brood up at the right time in the spring. They catch the honey flows, they make a lot of honey. So my ultimate selection criteria for the best hives are just hives that make a lot of honey. I can kind of ignore those other tiny factors. I don't have to micromanage. Don't feed protein. I don't think that's really necessary. Again, the best adapted bees are going to store a good amount of pollen, be able to deal with that. Honey harvest, depends on the year. If I've got a lot of honey, harvest a lot of honey. If I don't have a lot of honey, generally want to let the bees feed themselves over winter. Again, depends on what I'm trying to do. If I'm at my optimal population, I can afford to lose a few hives, and I will let them, if they haven't, their job is to collect honey for me. Like that's how that works. They're supposed to get nectar, bring it back here, process it, store it, and then I take it. I'm okay with not taking it, but I'm not going to support them if they didn't do their part. Right? I'll leave enough for them to survive, but I'm not going to support them if they haven't figured out that part on their own. Why keep bees? I've done pollination, personal pollination. I don't think that's a major issue. There's enough bees in my area. I like to make honey. I like to sell some nukes and queens to make some money for paying for equipment. I like the hobby to be kind of self-supporting, but in the long term, there's been many years where I spent a whole lot more money than I made, and there's been some years where I've made a good amount of money to pay back. So ultimately, it's not. I'm not one of those people that feels like. So one of the ideas that I run across with new backyard beekeepers is they often have the idea like, I'm gonna buy these bees, I'm gonna buy this stuff, I'm gonna put it all together, they're gonna make me honey, I'm gonna sell it to my friends, and it's gonna pay for itself. Don't. It's probably not gonna work that way. The last podcast I published, my catchphrase at the end was, have fun keeping bees, because if you're not having fun, you could definitely afford to use jet ski with what you're gonna spend on beekeeping. Right? So there's other ways to have fun. If you're not having fun, like, why do it? Right? If you're not enjoying what you're doing, do something else. And if you're not, now I know all of you are in here are beekeepers, but there's a lot of people who get into beekeeping to try and save the bees. As if, first of all, as if they need saving, but secondly, as if what you can do can help. But there's a lot of ways, a lot of better ways of helping the bees than buying them. It's really, I mean, if you just think about the logic of that, like I want to save, what's a good example? I want to save iPhones, so I'm going to buy some. If iPhones can't figure out their own selves, then what am I going to do about it, right? Same thing with bees, because especially the sources of bees that we have to buy are not particularly high quality, most of them. And I'm trying to get new beekeepers away from this consumer mindset. So I can talk about that a little bit with my next talk here. Mouse back. I'm already over time. I will try and make this quick. I blame Robyn.
Thanks.
In a friendly way. So again, my focus is new beekeepers, right? I'm trying to teach people how to start off in such a way that they're not going to get burned out, because the very common mode that people get into beekeeping is buying equipment, buying bees, keeping them for a few months, and they die. And they buy more bees, and you do that 2 or 3 times, and you're either out of money or you're annoyed with it, and you give it up. And honestly, I don't want your beekeeping equipment when you're done being a beekeeper. Mostly because it's all 8 frame and I do 10 frame stuff. So I don't want that to happen. So why treatment free? Again, like there's a difference between treatment and non-treatment. If your goal is to keep hives alive, my goal is not to keep hives alive. My goal is to let them do what they want, and I manage them to make some honey and other products for myself. So again, the idea that if you treat, they're all going to survive. If you don't treat, they're all going to die. First of all, that's blatantly false. And the difference between the two groups is 10 hives out of 100 on average. Now that being said, there's a lot of new beekeepers especially that lose all their hives first, and that's okay. But if your goal is just to keep things alive, that's going to hurt. But again, that's not how nature works. We got to stop thinking of bees as pets. They're not pets. You can't pet them. Well, you can, but you can't cuddle with them. They're not cats, right? You don't take them to the vet and have them spayed and neutered, right? They're not a rabbit in a cage. You don't have to put the rabbit food in there, or else the rabbit will die. They're bees. They're functionally wild animals. We've domesticated them only a little bit, but when we try to domesticate them too much, they protest by dying. We kind of got to leave them a little bit to do their own thing anyway. All bees were treatment free until the 20th century, pretty much. I think we should be able to do that again. Treatment's a lot of work. Costs money. Again, I don't think we should have to do that. I have been doing this for 16 years. I know for a fact that they can and will survive on their own. I think, I'm not going to try and make a political statement here, but I think bringing money into things that should be fun ruins them often. You can have hobbies, you can have social groups. A lot of times organizations, small organizations that are fun for people, and then they'll elect a president and a treasurer, and then they start fighting about where the money's supposed to go, and it doesn't work out. And so with beekeeping especially, we get into this idea where, again, we're going to buy these things, we're going to do these things, and now that I've bought this thing, I have to protect my investment. Right? If you bought a cat, if you bought it, like my brother bought like an $800 dog. So now you got to keep the dog inside so the dog doesn't run out the road and get killed because you spent $800 on the dog. Right? These bees, first of all, you can catch them for free. They make swarms. You can go catch them for free. It's really good when you don't have to pay for bees. You're not so worried about losing that money. When you know where to get free bees, if they die, you know where to get them again. So you don't have to worry about losing that. I guess I didn't explain threatening the species. I don't want to go too much into that right now. Maybe we can talk more about that later. But it's my experience, I'll put it this way, that out in the wild, out in the wilderness, I've found evidence of bees away from humans. They do fine away from humans. It's our interfering with pesticides especially, and artificial controls and things that actually are threatening the species. If there wasn't commercial migratory beekeeping, if there wasn't people transferring bees across oceans and across countries, we wouldn't have varroa. It would be in Asia where it was. It worked its way over to Europe. But it wouldn't be here if somebody hadn't brought it here. Colony collapse disorder, I feel, wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't happen in a world where millions of beehives are trucked to one spot in the country every year and let them mix their diseases together. Right? Bees don't move naturally that far. A swarming hive is only going to move a mile or so. In a natural population, diseases move through the population slowly. They don't spread quickly like we have in our world. My advice for somebody starting keeping bees, don't start till next year. If you're not totally ready by next year, then wait another year. Figure out what you're going to do first. So often, this time of year especially, we get, oh, I've got bees coming. Bees are going to be here on Tuesday. Somebody help me set up my hive. I don't know what to do. Well, you'll learn. I say find a beekeeper who's already doing what you want to do and just copy them. Don't worry about the cafeteria mindset. You are a new beekeeper. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to choose these things. You don't know what's going to be the best. You think you do. You've bought it. So you buy a car. You know how to buy a car. You know what cars are like. You've driven a car before. You know what you like in a car. So you go to a car dealership and you say, I like this car. I'm going to buy it. If you're starting something new like bees, you're not going to know anything. You're going to look at something that looks awesome, like a flow hive or something. Nothing against flow hives, but they're not a tool of education. They're a tool of convenience. And if you don't have the education first, the convenience is not going to be very helpful. So pick a mentor, pick me, pick Michael Bush, pick Sam, pick whoever. Just pick one, go with it. I picked Bee Lesby. So at the time when I started, she was a successful treatment-free beekeeper. She had been always. She had published things. I could talk to her on the internet. And once I learned how someone else did it, it's like the same idea as an apprentice. Once you learn how to do something, then you can innovate and do your own thing. Right? You can't break the rules properly until you know what the rules are. Some other good options here. Kirk Webster, Bee Northeast. Sam Comfort, he's right here local, if you're here local. Michael Bush, he's in Nebraska. Tracy Smith is in Canada. Jacqueline Freeman is in southern Washington. She's much more on the natural, I like to use the word spiritual. I don't know if the word spiritualistic is correct, but a much more intuitive, less scientific approach. And when we use the term scientific, that's not to say that what we do isn't scientific. It's just to say that we haven't discovered what the science is behind these things in a lot of cases. We in treatment-free beekeeping, we often get the criticism that we're not scientific. I totally disagree. We're running off of the prime science of natural selection, and that trumps everything, all the details down below. Right? Natural selection is the thing that governs us all. Just because we can't explain why something works doesn't mean it doesn't work. Doesn't mean that it can't work, or doesn't mean that we shouldn't try it at least. The main problem with treatment-free beekeeping, and as science goes, is because I feel that most of the science is driven by monetary interests, and that's not to denigrate anybody, because money's the way things work a lot of times. Just like I don't blame commercial beekeepers for treating. They have a different focus than I do. They need to make money every year, they go out of business. So things that you definitely should do: get together with your local beekeepers. They're going to know how to do what you want to do better than you will. Don't act like an expert on the internet. There's a lot of that since the internet showed up. At the beginning of the internet, everybody on the internet was experts because they're the ones who created it. As they let other people on, it kind of got worse and worse. So, and I admit that's a huge problem in beekeeping social media, is you get people who are not yet beekeepers or planning on being beekeepers, and they read somebody like Michael Bush, they read what I've written, watch my videos, whatever, and then they parrot it as if it's their own experience, and it's not. It's important that you share only your own experience. Talk about only what you've done. Because if you're sharing somebody else's experience, then it's basically like gossiping, right? The other thing is people that get bees and decide just to not treat and go from there. And that doesn't work, because not treating is not simply the opposite of treating. Treatment-free beekeeping is an entire different world. It's got a lot of very similar looking things, the way we do things. But it's an entirely different way of understanding beekeeping, different way of keeping bees, even though it uses many of the same methods. I say that my beekeeping practice looks virtually the same as anybody else's, just leaving off the treating part. But there are subtle differences. How many hives you should have? You should have more. So statistically, and I don't know if these are totally accurate, I've heard this, but a single hive has a 60% loss rate each year. Right? So the more hives you have, the less chances of losing all your hives every year. Losing all your hives makes it much more difficult to work back. If you have 5 and you lose 3, that's workable. If you have 8 and you lose 3, now you have 5. That's what you wanted in the beginning. I recommend everybody have at least 5. Go into winter with 8 so that you come out with 5. More is always better. Go big or go home. I don't know if that's totally accurate, but go bigger than you think you want to. Right? If you want 5, go with 8. It's much easier to work. If they all survive, it's much easier to pare down from 8 than it is to build back to 8 or build back to 5 from 2 or 1 or 0. Starter kit. This again for you guys is probably not relevant. I recommend people don't buy starter kits because they'll give you stuff you don't need. They'll give you a book that you won't read, or maybe you will read, and it doesn't. If you're a treatment-free beekeeper, a starter kit's not going to have a treatment-free beekeeping starter book because there are none. I'm trying to write one. They're going to give you a suit. You might not like this type of veil. I don't like this type of veil. You really don't need a queen excluder at all. You can totally get by without that. It's just gonna, especially for a new beekeeper, I find that adds a level of complexity that is gonna confuse things. You just don't need it. Maybe you want a different style hive tool. And the boots aren't included either. Why is that in the picture? So yeah, stuff you don't need. I recommend going without gloves unless you have just absolutely murderous bees, because it will teach you, like life will teach you. There's so much to this, so many questions I get when I just go, just try it. It's gonna teach you. Try it in a way that's not gonna cost you a lot of money. It's gonna teach you. Nature will teach you. Life will teach you. If you pay attention, all of this stuff will teach you. But we live in a world where we're focused on information. We have the internet. We can Google everything. You know, like you just wandering around one day and you hear free fall and you're like, I wonder where Tom Petty's from. 20 years ago, you'd just have to keep wondering. Now you can Google it, and it's Florida. It doesn't, you know. Where to get bees? Should get packages? Definitely not. They come from low quality sources. They're shipped across the country. They're from a climate that's totally unlike yours. Unless you live here and you want to buy packages from Sam, in which case that's fine because they're from here. That's okay. You want bees from here. You don't want them from somewhere else. So here's again from the Bee Informed Partnership. This is the winter loss depending on the place where you get your colonies from. Notice packages is way high, but they're all somewhat high. First year colonies have a high loss rate. That's a fact. Swarms in nature, like there's almost a 40% survival rate if you catch the swarm and hive it yourself, or loss rate, sorry. In nature, they're going to have an 80% loss rate naturally. Splitting here is the lowest. Splitting's the best way to get bees if you already have bees. If you don't have bees, it's different. Yeah, so packages are no. I recommend not buying bees at all. Catch swarms. Swarms are free. You learn how to catch swarms, you'll never be out of bees. I know a number of beekeepers whose hobby is catching swarms. They don't even really do that much beekeeping. They just catch swarms. They give swarms to other people. A beekeeper, if you catch enough swarms, you can sort of change all those other functions of beekeeping, right? All the breeding, you don't need breeding if you catch enough swarms. You just keep the ones you like, right? That's your breeding. That's fun. I'll try to keep this up. I'll go through management a little bit more in my next talk tomorrow about relaxed management. It's basically about chilling out. There's a lot of very uptightness and, again, high concern over protecting one's investment in a hobby, and that's not fun, so we don't do that. Any questions? Oh, and I forgot to mention early, if you have questions while we're going along, feel free to interrupt. We don't want to get past where you've lost what you had a question about. Yeah.
The small cone foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Steve Gillespie was your mentor, your teacher, whatever.
My model, yeah.
Okay, your model. So I've never had any experience. You have to buy the foundation.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? So someone has to make that foundation,
mm-hmm.
and then you have to purchase it, and then you have to stick with it, and that's your way of controlling varroa.
No.
No. Okay, so
I don't control varroa.
Okay, well, wasn't that one of the methods? I thought it was listed under.
There's a lot of argument about that, and always has been. There are no published studies that demonstrate control of varroa through small cell foundation.
Oh, okay, so when Robyn put that up, what was that on, what category was that under? Hive management?
No, you're right. It was under cultural controls of varroa mites.
Right.
The studies are conflicting. Some show a difference using small cell versus large cell, and some don't.
Okay, but if you have a top bar hive and you let them
Yes,
just
that's
make their own
fine.
comb, that will be small cell? Is that that's my question.
Maybe.
The way that okay, so we're defining our method. This is a very good question. I define small cell specifically as 4.9 millimeter diameter. Natural comb encompasses a very wide range of comb diameters, from 4.4 millimeter for the smallest brood cells, all the way up to maybe 8 millimeters for the largest honey cells. So in a hive without foundation, that's why I define foundationless methods, either with Langstroth or top bars or Warre, whatever, as foundationless and not as small cell, because the bees will build a huge variety of cells.
Doesn't that depend on what they're being fed, or what their nutrition is like? Because if you give them foundation that is larger, they may fill that cell differently than if you reduce the size of the foundation, like the small cell. So that I believe that is a powerful control. If you offer them small, is it called small cell comb? That's a control. That's a treatment. I think. I'm asking.
Okay, yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to, there's a difference in what I tell people, because if I want to tell people a causal relationship between things, I want to have scientific backing for them. And I don't feel that I have scientific backing for small cell as a control for varroa. There are other beekeepers who strongly advocate that small cell is definitely a control for varroa. But I would juxtapose that idea against the idea that large cell is what then? Is it pro-varroa? Either you're gonna use foundation to keep your comb straight, or you're not. So one type of foundation can't be a treatment while the other one isn't. They both have to be. If they are, then they both have to be. So one is treatment against varroa, one is treatment for varroa. It's a paradox that I think, in my view, I set foundation itself aside as not related to the treatment question. Foundation is there to keep comb straight. It's a management tool. It's a manipulation of the hive in the same way that a frame or a box is. The size of the foundation, again, if it's treatment against varroa, then another size is treatment for varroa. Or at best, it's a nothing. And so I can say that I have used small cells since the beginning of my beekeeping experience, and I have been able to maintain population of bees without losing all of them. I feel that for me, the reason why I would say that small cell works is because it properly selects, let's see, how am I going to say this? It properly differentiates the size of bees between workers and drones, so that the mites will prefer drones as a larger source of food that stays in its cell longer, allowing the mites to breed more effectively, and allowing the hive to withstand a greater infestation of varroa because the predation is on the drones, which are more expendable than the workers are. That's the case that I make. Yeah.
Can I add to that? So one of the theories is that if we go from giving bees this larger foundation, going back to the smaller side, and actually squish the male mites, because the bees would be larger and the cells would be smaller, and so they wouldn't be able to produce in the same way as the cell. The problem is that once you start doing that, the bees actually just start to produce smaller bees, so they're hurting the mites in the end. So that's why there's all that conflict in studies. That
yeah, the hypothesis.
The size of the bee is going to change with the size of the cell, so you can't depend on that cell size to exclude the mites from inside of those brood cells.
And I'm not sure where that theory ever came from. This is no offense to you, but I think it's a red herring. The theory behind small cell from small cell proponents was never that there's not enough space for the mites to reproduce. The theory behind it from D. Lesby from the beginning was that she called the pseudodrone theory, which she was writing about back in the 90s. And that's that larger workers mean that the varroa predate on the workers more than they had before with the drones. And more damage to the workers means more damage to the hive.
So I just want to add, when you hear about the comb project tomorrow, you're going to hear that my conventional and organic colonies got standard for 5.4 millimeter foundation, and my treatment-free got small cell 4.9. And so this year, in the fall, when the mites are at higher populations, I'm going to go in and see where the mites are reproducing. And so the cool thing about being part of the comb project is they all have the same genetics, you know, whatever, so that we can see, are the mites in the same apiary, so the same population of mites reproducing differently in the two types. I feel like a lot of the other studies have been, for example, like you're saying, if you just throw small cell into a colony that's had large cell all along and they lay in there, it's not the same as a colony that's been on small cell all along. So that's what's wrong. That's why it's a controversy, because I don't feel like the studies have been done just right to really show, like, you know, because they'll throw like large cell and small cell comb into a colony and follow it for 4 months, and then they say that they've solved it, and I disagree. I think like a project like mine, where, you know, okay, now they're in their second year, they've been in this comb, they've gone through that process. I even tried to get bees that came from small cell originally, and so I think I'll be able to add some data to that theory. We can look at where are they reproducing, like drone versus worker, and how well is that going for them? You know, like, are they making fewer mites in the worker versus drone?
Yeah,
Stuff like
the
that.
problem is in the fall, when that spike happens, they're going to stop producing drone brood. They're going to stop producing drones. So, you know, those mites are going to...
I can do it any time. What do you think? August? July? When should I measure it? When do you think would be the best time?
For measuring...
Like where the mites are reproducing?
I mean, all the time, right? Because I mean, once those drones stop being produced, like, those mites are going to emerge and go, you know, go somewhere. It's still going to be...
It's true.
So I mean, those winter bees, which are the most important bees that are raised, you know, then they're in the colony, so.
And that's where I'd say the genetic factor comes in with traits like BSH and various other traits, undoubtedly some of which we haven't even discovered yet. Hang on one second. There was, I lost it. Go ahead.
I have a couple questions. For your study, are you doing any foundation lists?
Me, no.
Because I think one thing I feel like we're talking about, like, treatment-free or whatnot, and alternative beekeeping. It's still a control, though. I feel still like human manipulation control. Whether that's a treatment, I feel like we're still trying to treat for something without knowing it's a treatment. We're still trying to address something in the bee world by putting foundation in and make something useful for the beekeeper. Like, that's where I'm grappling a lot. I'm using foundation now, the Langstroth hives I acquired, because I got packages this year. I'm trying to catch swarms, so I want to get them started fast. But like in the lands, I'm going foundationless. Just the way I approach is like less interference. I'm also just curious to see what cells the bees build, and figure like the bees maybe know better than us. But I also do have a question about like foundation, the ways bees work. I read a couple of different studies. If you just do a strip of foundation to help them get started, will the cells, will that influence the way the bees build cells on that whole frame? Because if they're starting with a kind of base of foundation, will they be more inclined to replicate that same cell size?
I would say they're very rapidly going to adjust back to whatever they want or need. And you see this a lot of times, and these are questions that beekeepers grapple with all the time, and I would say that it would be much easier to make good conclusions from little experiments like this. The problem is, if you're doing a foundationless hive, you're often starting with bees that came from foundation if you're buying bees, and so that effect is going to propagate itself into that. If you're catching swarms from somewhere off in the wilderness, you might have a different result. But as far as starter strips, a lot of people use starter strips. It's generally, I would say, the most justifiable. The response, I would say, is that the bees will start theirs, and a lot of times even on foundation they won't do it. That's one of the problems that has happened with the small cell studies is like they take a hive and they just stick small cell foundation in and expect it to work the same way as conventional foundation. Conventional foundation is large enough so that it can be drawn in the honey supers. Bees will draw it out perfectly and fill it full of honey. You cannot do that with small cell foundation. If you put small cell foundation in a honey super, you're going to get honeycombs. They will immediately, they'll take the bases, you got a hexagonal base of the comb, and they will make triangles out of it, and they will build bigger cells on top of it. So when you see something like that show up in a study, you know that they never asked a small cell beekeeper how to do this.
I'm doing that. I'll measure it.
The difference, though, you're using man-like plastic foundation, though, right?
Yeah.
That works differently than wax. You can oftentimes get that drawn in other places. With wax, it almost always has to be in the brood nest to be drawn the correct size.
In the small cells, you're going to have a bunch more bees. So would it be like good or bad, the traits of your bees? Would you get, maybe more honey or more fight off the bad things in the hive and such? Is it that much of a difference, like the amount of bees you would get?
I wouldn't say that you'd get a bunch more bees.
Yeah.
The number of bees is going to be based on the size of the brood nest, the ability of the colony to support a certain number of bees in brood. That being said, if you have smaller comb and smaller bees, the argument is that fewer resources will go into making those same bees. The brood nest will be more compact, therefore more efficient in maintaining heat and humidity.
Makes sense.
And also there's some evidence that it shortens the length of the time that it takes for an egg to develop all the way to an emerging worker. Mm-hmm. And so again, with cells being in use for a shorter period of time, that would allow the brood nest to be even more compact. Yeah. So I don't know that it makes more bees, but
so it wouldn't be more honey or whatever their traits were more. So I could see how you're saying it would kind of compact, which is always nice, it seems like.
But again, I would say a lot of these things are claims made by small cell proponents. I'm a small cell proponent. I've always used it. It has always worked for me. However, I'm hesitant to give like if-then statements. If you do this, then this will happen. I'm saying people have argued for this. This is the way that they say it works. This is the way that I think it works. And as far as where the varroa is, like you were talking about, I've done a little bit of anecdotal research myself by opening up brood comb, workers and drones, and counting the mites. And so I don't remember the exact numbers. You can find it on my website. I posted about it. But in all the worker brood that I opened in this one hive, there were only 4 mites that I found in the worker brood, and none of them were reproducing. in the drone brood that I opened up, I think it was something like a third of the cells had a mite in them, and most of those mites were reproducing. So that backs up my theory of the case. It also confirms my bias. So I'm happy to admit that.
I'm trying to convert all mine to the small cell, so somewhere along the line, you guys convinced me that it's worth it. But
I say if your foundation is for keeping comb straight, and if you're gonna use foundation, you might as well use a size that is more natural than others. That's my case for it.